Hello and welcome to our broadcast. We're going to pause this for about 60 seconds to allow some time for our rest of our audience to come in, and we'll be back with you in just a moment. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon where you're joining us from. And welcome to the next in the series of SSPI talent management webinars, higher potential or higher experience? A big question, and it's a question, of course, as always, is a question of balancing the short and the long-term gains in that process. My name is Robert Bell. I am the Executive Director of the Space and Satellite Professionals International, which is an organization that was founded in a bar back in 1985 and has come a long way since then, we're pleased to say. And here at SSPI, we're on a mission. And our mission is to make the satellite and space industries one of the best in the world at attracting and engaging the talent that powers innovation. I think we can all agree that we're in a time of immense disruptive and also incredibly exciting change in our business. Innovation has always been its lifeblood, but that's never been truer than it is today. And the only way that we can continue to succeed at that is by punching far above our weight as a pretty small industry, actually, in the technology world, in competition for talent with some of the best known names in the world. And so at SSPI, it's our mission to continue helping the industry to do that. We are, if you're not familiar with us, a network of about 3,500 members and some 50 sponsoring organizations, and we spread across 40 nations, highly concentrated in North America and in Europe, but also in a lot of other places. We have regional chapters and affiliates in the US, Europe, South America, Africa, Asia, that put on local activities and serve as a local point of contact for members in that area. And both at that level, in our chapters and affiliates, and at the international level, we're very busily engaged in business networking and educational events throughout the calendar year. And you may very well have attended at least one of those. When we're not doing events, we're also busy managing a portfolio of unique programs, all aimed at that issue of attracting and engaging talent into our business. And they range from our Better Satellite World campaign, which is all about promoting the incredible contributions that this industry makes to life here on Earth, from the economy to humanitarian work, from television and entertainment to the spreading of knowledge and education to all the corners of the planet. Our Next Generation campaign focuses squarely on that graduate, undergraduate level, and sometimes below when we can do that, to make them aware of satellite and space as a career opportunity. It may come as a surprise to many of us, but they're not. They may be building CubeSats in their classrooms, but they don't know that this commercial industry exists. And when I'm working one-on-one with students, or as I will be doing later this week, going to a student space conference down in Cape Canaveral called Space Vision, and I start telling the commercial industry story, their eyes will get very wide and light right up, because they all think they're going to have to get a job working for a space agency, for JPL, for something like that, and they just literally don't know that this other world exists. So it's an important mission for us to educate them about it. Our New Century Workforce campaign turns that same idea around. In this case, we focus on talent management within our industry. So we work closely with the human resources community. We interview them. We're always looking for the best practices that companies of any size, small companies, mid-sized companies, can pick up and use in order to become more effective at attracting and engaging and getting the most out of the talent in their companies. And finally, our Leaders Quest. Ultimately, what we're in the business of doing is making leaders. And so we do in our Leaders Quest, we do that in public, in award ceremonies for people who are in the middle or beyond in their careers, who achieved incredible things, like Dave Thompson there at Orbital ATK in the picture, but also people who are 35 and under, who have already achieved remarkable things. And we do that through our Promise Awards presented every year as part of our Future Leaders Dinner, as well as many other programs. And those are all made possible. The hard work that we do and that our volunteer members do is all made possible by financial support, not surprisingly. And so I just want to take a moment to thank 3 companies in particular that have signed up to be patrons of SSPI. They are the Arianespace Group, Boeing, and Space Systems L'Oreal, or SSL as it's now known. And of course now it's part of MDA and is going through many new transitions. But we're very grateful to them for their financial support throughout the year. Okay, so some housekeeping details before we get to the reason that you all joined us. In this webinar, all attendees will be in listen-only mode. However, we very much want to include you and your questions and comments in this discussion. And so you will find on the control panel on your screen a section called Questions. If you just open that up, type a question in there, I will see it, and I'll be able to bring your questions, your comments, and your ideas into this discussion. And that's always a very, very fruitful and meaningful part of what we do. So please don't hesitate. This session is being recorded, and that recording will be made available to all attendees, as well as the presentation involved here. And those recordings are an increasingly popular and important part of the intellectual property that SSPI is creating, that is available to our members and sponsors to make what they do every day better. And finally, technical support. We've never actually had a problem with our webinars that we're aware of, but you might want to jot down one of these 2 numbers, either toll-free in the US or not so much outside the United States and Canada. So I'll give you a moment to just do that, and we will launch in. Our agenda is pretty simple. I've completed the first part of it, which is to introduce you to SSPI and some of the work we do and why we do it. And from now on, we're going to be having a dialogue. It's higher potential or higher experience, how to balance short-term and long-term gains in running a business in this complex and fast-changing world. And I'm very pleased to introduce 2 gentlemen who will be joining us for this conversation, both of them CEOs of their respective organizations. David Myers, President and CEO of DataPath, has a career he'll be telling you about. He's also serving currently as the chair of SSPI's board of directors. And Nathan Kundtz, President and CEO of Kymeta Corporation, which of course has gone to market this year with some exciting new technology. He'll be telling us about that. Nathan is also a member of our board of directors, and we're very pleased to have both of these gentlemen with us. Hello. David, are you with us?
Hello, thanks for having me.
We're very pleased to have you. Nathan, are you with us as well?
Sorry, that was me the first time. I think David's also on.
I am now. I'm here as well.
Yeah, whatever order you come in on, we're pleased to have you with us. Let's start this off by letting people get to know a little bit more about you. And I guess we'll just start with Nathan. Could you just briefly introduce yourself and your company so that they can understand the point of view you bring to this discussion? And could you mention there how many employees do you currently have in your company?
Yeah, certainly. So as you mentioned, I'm the CEO of Kymeta. We think of ourselves now as a company that makes a product about the size of a pizza box that you can put anywhere on the planet, on just about anything on the planet, moving or not, and get a broadband internet connection. What that really is an antenna technology, satellite antenna technology made using consumer electronics parts that does all electronic beamforming and acquisition. We're bundling capacity with that and stepping in most of our customer interactions into a service provider role and providing a complete solution. Our company currently has about 160 people and is growing.
Wow. I didn't actually know that about your business model, Nathan. So thank you. That's extremely interesting. It's taking a leaf from Inmarsat, I guess.
Yeah, I'd be happy to discuss the business model at length at the right time. And if you want to, we can do that now.
And, yeah, let's just take 1 minute, because again, you obviously folks are really well known for pioneering this technology, but I think it's an interesting.
Yeah.
Just tell us a little bit more about
that. So our experience in the communications market is just that. It's the communications market as opposed to the satellite communications market or the antenna market. And it's very important to provide a complete solution to customers. The reality is if we can't bring something to a place where it solves the ultimate customer's problem, that really limits what we're capable of doing. And while it's very possible to partner in some circumstances, that can be tricky in new markets. And so a lot of what we're focused on are markets that have been difficult or impossible to access in the past, in particular land mobility markets. So we have been focused on, in our initial deployments, sort of RVs, buses, trains, as well as small maritime watercraft that are under or unserved by existing technologies.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Thank you. Thank you. And David, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and the company?
Sure. First of all, thank you for having us here. My name's David Myers. I'm the president and CEO of DataPath. DataPath is about a 25-year-old company, and our slogan, I guess, is from terminals to teleports and all the tools in between. So we are a manufacturer and a service provider for a lot of the ground control infrastructure that goes into satellite networks. We provide services really to 4 key markets. To the aerospace market, namely the UAV space. A lot of the large control systems that we build are used to fly unmanned aerial vehicles, unmanned aerial systems of a variety of types and sizes. We also manufacture large teleport equipment that is for use largely by the military, but also in the telecommunications broadcast sectors, as well as increasingly in the critical infrastructure and utility markets. So those are the areas that we focus on. We have 4 lines of business. We have what we call our custom systems business, which is where we build large ground systems that start at about 2.5 meter in diameter antennas, and they may be mounted on trailers or on vehicles for mobile command centers, for disaster recovery, or for news gathering agencies, or for the military. We then move up to larger systems that are built on sort of portable or deployable skids, 40-foot long systems that have 4 meter or 6 meter antennas. And then last but not least, we actually build and service large-scale antenna systems at broadcasters and teleports around the world that may be 6, 7, up to 13 meters in diameter. So that's our custom systems business. We have our second business, second largest piece is field services, where we have about 240 field technicians deployed around the world in about 12 different countries. And in many cases, they're living on military bases right alongside of our customers for the Army or the Air Force or the Marines. And they're actually managing and operating some of the teleport operations at military bases, as well as providing maintenance and service and support for all of the satellite communications equipment that goes in and out of the field. The third business that we have is what we call our portable terminals business. These are comms on the pause. So Nathan talked about comms on the move on vessels and vehicles. Our systems tend to be high bandwidth systems that are deployed quickly, but in a stationary capacity. And these may be small systems used by special forces or by satellite news gathering agencies or intelligence community players. And they may be very small so that you can fold them up and put them in a backpack and carry it on board an airplane. Or they may be larger systems that are embedded onto a vehicle, but usually they're 2 meters or smaller in diameter. And last but not least, our fourth line of business is our software and cybersecurity business. Here is where we provide the tools in between, I guess, from our slogan, which is we build a product called MaxView, which is a complete end-to-end network monitor and control software suite for managing large networks. And we do this for both military and commercial and broadcast customers. So that's DataPath in a nutshell. We have not quite 400 employees today. We are headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. We have offices in and around the Washington, D.C. area. We've got one in Virginia, one in Maryland. And then we have an operation in Stockholm, Sweden, one in Dubai, one in New Delhi, and one in Singapore.
Okay, well, thank you. That's yeah, it's funny. I tend to, because of some other work I'm doing, I tend to know your cybersecurity side probably best of all, and I find out it's 4 out of 4. But nonetheless, some very busy people doing some great work. Now, here's my great opportunity to ask a question. It's my first question for you, gentlemen. It's a question I've been wanting to ask a CEO for, since I was about 23, I think. And it's a question that every young person that I talk to also asks me. Every young person entering that job market confronts a catch-22. The lowest entry-level job in an industry is typically advertised as requiring between 1 and 5 years of experience. And as I said during my first job search, how exactly am I supposed to get the experience I need to get hired if I can't get hired without the experience? So since you gentlemen have been in this business for quite a while, why do you think most companies write their job descriptions that way? What purpose is it serving for them? And David, since you were speaking before, why don't you just grab that first?
Sure. Well, I guess, I've worked in large public companies as well as more middle-sized companies like DataPath, and I guess to answer the last part of your question first, why do companies put this minimum requirement for experience? I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that if you hire somebody right out of school, there's definitely an investment that you have to make in that talent. People come out of school with lots of energy and lots of new knowledge, but they don't have experience, and so you have to figure out how to train people. Well, here's what you learned in the academic world, and here's how you apply it in the real world, so to speak. And that absolutely requires energy and time and patience for the hiring company. Early in my career, I was fortunate. I worked for what was Kymeta Corporation at the time, now part of HP. And they actually did a really good job of bringing in new recruits kind of right out of school and put them through rotational programs to train them on different aspects of the business. And you were assigned a mentor and those kinds of things. But typically, it has to be a big company that's willing to make those kinds of investments. So I guess the advice I would give to the would-be job seeker coming out of school is try to find opportunities to get either internships or what we found very successful at DataPath, or co-op type programs where somebody is studying and going to school and working at the same time, applying what they learn, and you get some of that valuable experience so that when you do graduate, you're not just staring at a blank resume from an experience perspective. You actually have some credible companies on your resume.
Yeah, interesting. Nathan, what's your experience with that catch-22?
Well, certainly I would agree with the things David said, but maybe I can tag on with a little bit of additional commentary. I think one of the reasons you see sort of the 1 to 5 is in entry level is it's not so much about the learning that happens at 1, but it's when you're hiring somebody straight out of school, they're very much an unknown quantity, right? There's no track record of how they interact and how they might impact your culture, and that can be a little bit challenging. And so the use of internships and other more meaningful company interactions, especially for a small company like mine and David's, one hire makes a huge difference in a company that has approximately 150 people in it. And one person can really impact the entire organization or large pieces of it. And so we just always are really thoughtful about what's the personality that's coming in, how are they going to interact with the rest of the team, how's that going to grow the overall company. And so finding ways to go beyond, I'd say, like a specific set of experiences or a specific set of knowledge and into an understanding of how you're going to impact the culture of the company can be very important.
That's fascinating, because I think that employees tend to think of themselves as small cogs in big machines, because that's certainly the day-to-day experience. But I think you just said something very important, that yes, employees make a huge difference. As you say, one person in a 150 or a 60 or a 400-person organization actually is a key player, and perhaps that's a good perspective for anybody to have as they think about what they do every day. one of the problems that we identified in our first workforce study of the industry was what one HR executive described as everybody fishing in the same pool of the highly experienced, qualified candidates. You know, everybody wants to hire an ex-military person who did SATCON. Everybody wants to hire an ex-broadcast employee who did that, or somebody from another, competing company. And clearly, there's lots of good reasons to do it. You just identified some of them. As an HR person said to me, the best candidate for a position is typically already employed at another company. So, but there are clearly downsides as well to that fishing in the same pond. So Nathan, I mean, your company is fairly new in this business, or in the business it's creating. How does that dynamic play out at your company?
You know, in our experience, we have certainly hired from some within the satellite industry, but I'd say it's been limited relative to a company that might pursue a more traditional business model and set of markets. And so there's a set of relationships that are helpful to have within the company. There are people that you should know as you build partnerships, but increasingly, we really see ourselves as a communications company, and so we've been focusing more on some of the really successful communications companies and people who have their professional heritage in those areas. So companies like Cisco and Qualcomm as targets. And so I think it's helpful to do that. It's helpful to have some satellite specific experience, but I actually think there's a lot of benefits to building out the workforce more broadly. And in particular, as you mentioned, the satellite industry is relatively small, and there's a lot of things that have been learned and perfected in industries that are very close to ours that I think we can learn from.
Interesting. So you want a much bigger pool, or perhaps a whole set of pools that you fish in, as opposed to just that one.
Yeah, very much so. I think, like I said, there's value in having some, and I would say it's sort of foundational. You need to have some of that. You want to have a few people around that have spent a few decades in the satellite industry. That's really helpful. But you don't need to fill out your entire company in that way. And in fact, if you do, I think that can be detrimental.
Interesting. David, how about you? How about a data path, which of course is a much more, when you're serving government, military as a principal market, you're going to tend to be very focused on. I mean, military SATCOM is in itself a unique part of even the SATCOM business.
Yeah, it's a great point. At data path, probably more than 50% of our 400 employees today are veterans, most of whom did come out of either the Army Signal Corps or in military intelligence or some similar group where they were dealing with field communications on a regular basis. And that's a great asset. There's no substitute for having people in your company who actually were the customer at one point in their career, because they really can empathize with, hey, this is how you provide services that really help support the client's mission. So that's a great asset to have. At the same time, I would agree with Nathan that there's also no substitute for bringing in best practices from other industries. The satellite communications industry it's pretty unique in a lot of respects, and the skill sets and the experiences and the talents that you gain here are not necessarily applicable in other industries. And so I think that's why you see so many people who come to the satellite industry and stay and build their whole career here, because you do build up a really interesting knowledge base and an experience base that is well valued by companies in the industry. I know we all joke that when you go to the satellite shows that every few years you see the same people, they're just carrying different business cards because they tend to rotate around different companies. So that's certainly a good thing to retain that talent and that experience. At the same time, I do think that there are analogous industries, the cellular communications industry, telecommunications just in general, some of the new things that are happening in the digital space in terms of social media and big data analytics. Those are best practices that I think the satellite industry can really benefit from, because a lot of people, especially those who've been in the industry a long time still think almost in analog terms, because at the end of the day, even if you're delivering digital data, at some point you have to turn it into radio spectrum and transmit it over the air, and so it all comes down to RF. So the people who've been here a long time tend to think in those terms. So I think bringing some of the big data analytics kinds of thinking from other industries is a real asset as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. I agree with you about the analytics in particular. I sometimes preach about it or write about the fact that, listen, this is probably the biggest area of growth that we're going to face, and you can either do it yourself or you can let somebody else do it and let it make all the money. What do you want to do? What you said, though, David, interested me because, Nathan, you talked about going to different allied or adjacent, if you will, areas of expertise. How much of that do you think is also about hiring people who were your customers? Because you've defined your company as being in the telecommunications space. And so I'm just curious as to whether some of those people who are from outside the quote-unquote satellite industry are potentially wearing the hats of people who could have been your customers in a different job.
You know what? For the time being, in the spots I was speaking of, they're less likely to be our customers and more partners. Because of the types of industries we're going into. If I think about a typical customer in our commercial business, it might be somebody who manages a bus line and doesn't know anything about satellite communications or communications at all. They want to get Wi-Fi into their buses, and so they need support in doing that. And in that case, it's helpful to have insights, but it's different. I'll say in our government business, very similar to what David said, we do hire ex-military, and for exactly the reasons he mentioned. And in that case, it is very helpful to have the end user. And in that case, I think it's an example of a market in which your end user is typically pretty sophisticated, right? And so there are markets in which we have sophisticated end users, and it makes sense to hire from that because the experience is relevant. And then there's other markets where that's really not the right approach. The partnerships, though, I think are very important, and it is helpful to have people that have experience in those companies with whom you're partnering.
Yeah. Well, let's talk for a minute about the value of inexperience. In cliche terms, the great thing about experience is that you know a bunch of stuff, but it also blinds you in many ways. It channels your point of view in a certain direction. So when you do deal with interns, with works, with co-op, with that crop of new people that you're bringing to the company who don't necessarily know very much about the markets you serve, what are some of the values you see them as delivering to the company that perhaps you wouldn't get from a military veteran who knows that business backwards and forwards, or from somebody who understands the problem of the bus driver, the bus company that wants to install this technology? I guess, Nathan, let's start with you. I mean, do you have examples of that from your own company? Because you guys actually invented you invented your business, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm still on my first job, so, I think I fall into that category.
You do. And you're doing well. I want to say you've been doing well.
Yeah, thanks. And I sometimes joke about Kymeta, right? I wouldn't have been able to do what we've done if I had known at the beginning that it was impossible. But since I didn't know it was impossible, we went ahead and did it anyway, right? Right. And there's value to that kind of thinking. There's also tremendous value to the energy that that relatively junior employees can bring. I think I really like it when we have people that want to grow, and I'd say that's true of veteran employees as well as folks that are earlier in their careers, but it's more common in folks that are earlier in their careers. And what one of the themes is that the business is changing and changing rapidly. Our company is, and the overall market is, and so it's important to have a growth mindset with respect to your own skill sets and how you approach your job. And I think it's also healthy and good for the culture of the organization, the ecosystem of the organization, to have people that are sort of willing to do what it takes to get the job done on any given day. You kind of mentioned in a big company, you can feel like a cog in a much larger machine. In a small company, you do need a lot of people around who are sort of willing to pick up their tools and get stuff done. And so that's I think that's a frame of mind that it's certainly not unique to people with less experience, but it's something that you see as much more common than someone who's been doing, you know, a job or a similar job for a very long time and tends to stick with what they know.
Interesting. David, how about you? Because again, you defined a very specific way in which it's effective to bring in less experienced people and integrate them into the company.
Yeah, I think, you know, I've said two experiences with it. I guess in a past life working for another company in Houston, Texas at the time, we were trying to build a sales engineering function. And there weren't a lot of satellite communication companies in Houston at the time, and it was difficult to get people to relocate for a relatively entry-level job. So we made a decision, well, if we can't find them, then we'll grow them. And so we ended up hiring some people with just a year or two of experience out of a rotational program that some of the other telecom companies had done. AT&T had been doing one, and GTE, back when it existed, had been doing one. And what we found was that, to, I guess, Nathan's point, you brought in people who are earlier in their career, they want to make a mark, they want to have an impact, and to be frank, they don't carry any of the baggage from the industry or from the company. So it was nice because you're able to sort of train people and harness that enthusiasm in a very positive way. At DataPath, I think we've done both internships and co-ops, and I think one of the systems that we found works really well is the co-op model. Internships are great in more what I would call kind of generic functions, like, let's say, finance and accounting. We always have a couple of interns in our finance and accounting group because people come in, and because it's, you know, debits and credits and the way financial statements work are more or less the same from company to company. You just have to learn nuances. You can, you know, make an effective 3-month-long summer program for that intern pretty quickly. But in a technology space, it can take you a lot more than 3 months to just get up to speed on the engineering or the product development or that group. So we've actually found that co-ops work a lot better on the technical roles. So in our software group, our cybersecurity group, and in our hardware engineering group, we tend to try to recruit people from, in Atlanta, it's Georgia Tech or University of Georgia, Kennesaw State, some of the local schools, but, you know, we'll are always interested in bringing people from almost anywhere who want to work in that area. But if they'll do a semester with us in a co-op mode where maybe they're taking classes part-time and working part-time, and then maybe they go full-time in the summer as a co-op intern and then go back to school. And we've had great success hiring those people into permanent jobs when they graduate, because now they're familiar, we've made that investment in them and the technology, and to Nathan's earlier point, they're no longer an unknown quantity. We've gotten to work with them for a couple of years, and they've gotten to work with us and decide, is our company culture something they like and something they want to be a part of? And we've gotten to assess their ability and kind of lay a roadmap for where they might grow. So I definitely like the co-op programs for the more technical roles.
It's I actually want to follow up on that cultural question because it's an interesting one. But before that, I'm going to interpret a long question from our audience. This has to do with something. It cues off something I think Nathan said earlier about. It's the importance of knowing who your company is. You said, Nathan, you know, you redefined your company in a way from your original expectation into something new. And this person basically wants you guys to talk a little bit about the value of really knowing who your company is, why what it does matters, and then getting from that past the mission statements to actually walking that talk in the company. So it's a pretty general question, but you want to take a shot at it, Nathan?
Yeah, sure. Gosh, you know,
it's a big topic.
It's a big topic, and it's an important topic, but it's also, you know, it's a soft topic, and it's difficult to pin down those types of things. And in fact, we spend a lot of time thinking about how to measure, you know, whatever we can about our culture and our values, and I think are growing towards a better exemplification of our values. But when you start a company, you know, you hire, you know, however 5 people, 10 people, and the culture of the company is the aggregation of the culture of those people, you know, with wherever they came from, with whatever skills and competencies and baggage that they bring along with them, that sort of necessarily forms the beginning of your culture. And so when you're making those first few hires, it's really a critical phase. And unfortunately, it's also the time in the life cycle of a company where you know the least about what you want to be when you grow up. and so you know it's hard. And you know we're 5 years old now, and I think we've really started to understand what we wanted to be as a company better, certainly better than we used to. Although maybe that's sort of similar in age to a human, right? So we're 5 years old. We know that we want to do some things. We know we want to grow and learn, but you know, we certainly don't see ourselves as having reached our mature stage yet. In terms of building that culture, we identify specific cultural elements that we're looking for. We share them with the company. We reward people on the backs of those. I talk to all of my senior managers every week about what they're doing to drive those cultural elements forward in our company. And I think some of those have direct impacts, but I think more than anything, it creates a conversation about who we are, and it's important to have that conversation be continued on a regular basis. I think that if you don't pay attention to those elements and do your best to measure them, you know, you have no hope of that being a real positive for the company. And in fact, it can become quickly negative.
Sure. David, I happen to know that DataPath has been, it's been bought into a large company and it's been spun out of a large company. So it's been through some transitions, and you've had the opportunity to kind of recreate it, I guess. How do you look at that issue of knowing who you are and then making sure that you're walking that talk in the company?
It's a great point. Early in my career, I was very execution-oriented, just driven by the numbers, and didn't have time for all that soft skills culture stuff. But as I've matured and worked in a number of very successful organizations, one of the things that I've learned is that what made those companies successful was really the culture. Because it's one thing to have a group of really smart, capable people, but if you can't get them to work well together, if there's politics or infighting or passive-aggressive behavior, then it just neutralizes all that talent. So building a culture that's very collaborative and very collegial makes a lot of sense, practically speaking, because there's always the competition out there that's trying to undermine you. There's the competitor that may be very demanding. So you've got to make sure that internally you're operating culturally as well as you can. And you bring a great point up, which is DataPath's a 25-year-old company, but it was owned for about 5 years, from 2009 to 2014, by Rockwell Collins. And in fact, they had abandoned the brand name of DataPath, and it was really run like a wholly owned subsidiary or a division of Rockwell. So you had this sort of rapid growth middle market company that had been very entrepreneurial, very nimble, became a part of a large public company that tended to be driven by process and systems, and to some extent almost overwhelmed by bureaucracy. And then it spun back out again in 2014. So for the last 3 years, we have absolutely had to reinvent the culture and really re-embrace those notions of being nimble and being entrepreneurial and being quick to move on market opportunities and respond to the customer. The one thing that has been a constant for the business, though, regardless of who's owned it, and this is really helped by the fact that we have so many veteran employees, and by veteran I mean military veterans who've been in the field, is that the one constant, regardless of who has owned the business and the culture that we've shaped, has been a focus on supporting the mission. Because what we provide in terms of technology and services really is impacting people who are working in some pretty tough locations around the world, literally under fire in some cases. And so that has been a good consistency in terms of the culture. But now I think our focus has really been on operating collegially, operating as a collaborative environment. And we've set a couple of rules of engagement. We built a mission statement and a vision statement, to your point, when we spun out of Rockwell. We even laid out something we call PACE IT, which is the core values of the company: passion, accountability, customer service, execution, innovation, and transparency. And they could be any values. What really matters is the behaviors that you reward and encourage, and the behaviors that you don't tolerate. So, for example, we really promoted this notion of no elephants in the room. If people have a question or they have a concern about something, you have to have the courage to bring it up. Don't walk away from a meeting unhappy and sulking because your issue didn't get raised, bring it up yourself and make sure it gets covered. And we've given people a vernacular and a culture environment that makes it safe to do that, that no one's going to get beat up for being contrarian or for raising a difficult purpose or issue. In fact, that's your obligation, is to bring that up, and it's done in a positive way. And the other thing I would say about culture, at least my experience, is it's a little like your golf game. You know, you never get it right, and some days you shoot lousy off into the rough, and some days you're shooting par. You've got to constantly keep at it, and that's another important aspect of it. Is it really is a constant focus to keep the culture in the right direction.
Yeah, thank you. These were not questions I intended to go into, but I think these are really fascinating. Actually, here's another one from our audience. Nathan, this is a specific follow-up for you. You talked about in your list of analogous industries or adjacent industries to the one that we think we're in, you mentioned social media as opposed to, you know, IT and telecom. And the question is, what did you mean by that? Because that's an interesting, wouldn't have been on top of my list either.
I'm not sure I did mention social media. Okay. We focus on the connectivity business. So companies that are embedded into broader connectivity markets. And the two examples I gave were sort of Cisco and Qualcomm, as being sort of tech-driven, larger connectivity businesses. In fact, maybe it's just worth saying we don't focus on content, whether that be social media-driven content or otherwise. You know, we have work that we're doing with Toyota and some other automotive OEMs, but we're really focused on ensuring that we provide that connectivity layer in a way that can enable those people that are generating content in a variety of ways to be successful.
Including the car that's generating all that content on its own.
Exactly.
Let's talk a little bit about the balance. You know, we've talked a bit about, you know, what's good about hiring new, you know, inexperienced folks. What's good about hiring veterans in the largest sense, not just military veterans. What are some of the positives and negatives of that new hire? Let's say you did have a successful co-op program. You brought the person in. Yeah, sure. They're a known quantity, but they're still really new and shiny. What are you going to expect them to do that's good for the company, and what issues do you think you're going to have to, you know, grapple with, contain them, direct them, make them productive? And Nathan, I know you've been on a hiring spree, so why don't you talk about that?
Yeah. Okay, so just to make sure I understand, we're talking about what issues do we manage or think about sort of with relatively junior employees as opposed to veterans? Yeah,
and you know, in particular, where are you looking for? Where's your expectation that they're going to do something that you think is going to be really beneficial for the company, that beneficial influence that you've already referenced, versus the need to put them in a channel that will assure that they become productive over time?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, look, a lot of what's going to be necessary for them to become productive, if I think about, for instance, in the engineering side of the house, which is by far the largest piece of our organization, you know, they got to come up to speed to some extent with the technology and understand how to drive an impact. But usually it's not too hard to find small projects in which somebody can make a relatively quick impact. You know, if you're in a mechanical design environment, there's a piece or a mounting bracket that needs to be designed, and we would focus on getting them some quick wins so that they can have a relatively fast pace towards having done something that's positive for the company. You know, I think one of the things to be thoughtful about with the new employee, and I mentioned before the value of having people that are kind of go-getters and want to learn things. Sometimes that can be paired with an expectation that they'll rise faster than is reasonable within the organization, or is even possible. And you know, I think that there's an expectation management consideration. Like, there's nothing more wonderful than to have a very high horsepower individual in the organization, and sometimes there's a challenge that comes along with that, which is managing expectations for the pace of a career growth.
Yeah, no, absolutely. David, how about you? And it was kind of wasn't my most sharply framed question, but this issue of bringing a young person on, I gave you the co-op example, and what are you going to expect from them on the positive side? What do you need to do to get that person productive and perhaps avoid some negatives that could occur?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. In fact, I would echo what Nathan just mentioned. You know, one of the things that you see in the different generations of employees, and we have people that have been with DataPath for 15, 20 years, you know, the bulk of their career, and then we have people that we've just hired within the last 2 or 3 years as we've been growing and spun out and become independent again. And I think there's a couple of different things that I've observed. You know, one is it's not just you know, an age issue or an energy issue or where people are in their careers. There is really a very real analog versus digital divide that we see. And so, you know, we have employees that were, you know, have been in the industry for a long time. They were radio frequency operators. They had ham radios as hobbies, you know, things that are kind of have gone the wayside. And then you've got new employees that are coming in who've never had physical media. They've never owned a cassette tape. They don't listen to transistor radios. They stream their music digitally. And so it's a different perspective and a different mindset. And it's important to kind of connect the dots, that there's still value, a lot of value in some of those older analog technologies. And it's interesting because one of the challenges we find is, especially in engineering, somebody will be trying to explain something to one of our newer employees and try to use an old reference that they don't get because they never used that technology. They weren't experienced with it or exposed to it. And so the challenge is, how do you get your seasoned engineers to become mentors and use frames of reference that are relative to the new employees that are coming in, especially in the technical roles? The other thing that I think Nathan mentioned that I also agree with is, in the new generational divide, you've got a lot of people that fully expect that they're going to change jobs 10, 15 times, maybe more over the course of their career, whereas you have a lot of folks that expected to work for the same company for 10 or 15 or 20 years. And so as a result, I think a lot of the new folks coming in right out of school expect to climb fast. You know, they come in, they want to make a mark, have an impact, and then, as Nathan mentioned, they have unrealistic expectations. And it's not just that you are trying to make people pay their dues or anything along those lines. It's that there really is no substitute for having tackled multiple problems different ways and gain the experience that comes with that. And so I think that is part of the mentoring duty, is to help people get a breadth as well as a depth of experience before you put them into roles too soon, because then you can set them up for failure and set them up for disappointment. So I think that's definitely one of the trade-offs, is being a good steward of the new talent that you're bringing in the organization. You know, don't just stick them in a boiler room somewhere and expect them to churn out CAD drawings all day long. You need to be nurturing the talent and helping them find new experiences that round out their portfolio of tools in their toolkit.
Yeah, it's a very interesting example. I really like the the digital versus analog example, because I think that really captures what we're talking about. How about the flip side of that? So now you've got a bunch of experienced folks, let's call them the analog folks, although maybe that doesn't fit everybody's business. Now you gotta have a different set of expectations for them, in particular, and expectations for folks that are going to have to deal with a tremendous amount of change, and maybe may not be used to that. How do you go about setting the right expectations for them and helping them be successful? David, why don't you just pick that up?
Sure. Well, you know, at DataPath, we've absolutely been a company that's gone through a lot of change. The spin out from a public to a private company, we had to rebuild all of our back office systems, put in, you know, new ERP, new Salesforce tracking. We've launched 4 new product lines in the last few years, won several new major contracts. So I think in general, the team at DataPath, regardless of whether you've been there 20 years or whether you arrived in the last year, is kind of used to a quick pace and is used to a change environment. And in fact, part of what we promote as part of the culture is this notion of constant improvement, and that, you know, you constantly want to be making it better the next time, even if this time was pretty good, because there's always a way to adapt best practices or to do something that will make you more efficient, make life easier, make things faster, make things more profitable for the investors. And so from that perspective, I think the change management isn't so much a generational thing. It's much more of being embedded in the culture of your company. That change is not something to be afraid of. Change should be a good thing. And in fact, the more that you embrace it and the more that you present the need to do things differently as part of your ultimate goal of where you want to go, then you get people to buy in, and people start to recognize on their own that, oh, I guess I need to learn that new technology that we're getting ready to deploy. At DataPath, for example, we have largely been a comms on the pause company for the bulk of our career. So almost everything that we sell or build today, you have to stop what you're doing, aim the satellite dish, and transmit or receive, and then you can move on again. But that's not where the market's going. The market is much more in spaces where Kymeta is going, which is comms on the move and expectations that I can get my data in transit. And so we're looking at technologies, looking at partnering actually with companies like Kymeta and others to develop the right kinds of products for our military markets that fit that need. So that's a real change for people who spent 15, 20 years looking at parabolic dishes and now are having to think about phased array technology and those kinds of things. But I think most people get excited by it. That, you know, they see that that's kind of where the future of the market is and want to be a part of it, whether you're a long-time employee or whether you're a relatively new person right out of school.
Yeah, Nathan, what's your answer to that question?
So just so that I am answering the right question, it's sort of like the reverse of what you said before. So as you hire veterans, sort of what are the considerations to? So you know, I think the positives might be obvious and kind of self-evident. You bring in experience, and so there's a combination of knowledge as well as muscle memory that can be incredibly valuable. And you know, I think one should never underestimate the importance of sort of the neural net that comes from experience, and that, you know, in running a company as a relatively young CEO, I find a lot of value in the experienced folks that I have around me, and I try to ask a lot of questions, and I think that that's helped us to build our business more successfully. The things to look out for or to be mindful of, I think that there's a, how should I say, there are people who have been in large companies who really believe in their hearts that they want to work at a small startup, right? And it's going to be a fun, scrappy environment, that don't actually want to work at a startup. And so it's important to kind of screen for those when you can, and then correct if necessary, if you missed it in the hiring process. But there's a pace that we maintain here, not only in a pace of work, but in a pace of change and an expectation of change, that can be very, very uncomfortable for folks that are used to a different environment. And you know, I think that that's a choice folks should make. And those employees are by no means, how should I say, they can still be very productive in a lot of environments, but a startup environment is not the best place for everybody. And so, you know, you see that challenge more often with the veteran employee who will come in with a little bit more, you know, this is not how it should be done. This, you know, this should take 3 months, and we're like, well, we think we can get it done in 3 weeks. You know, there's a different set of cultural expectations within our organization that we try to check for.
Well, thank you, because actually I want to just, that was a note I made, maybe it was sparked by something I saw on the question panel, about exactly that, because one of my observations in the last couple of years of the satellite and space businesses that I interface with is everybody that I talk to is building the airplane while they're flying it, which is a way of defining startup culture. And we did our last webinar was about millennials in the workplace in particular, and that came up over and over again, that, you know, people have to understand that we're in a startup mode. But David, I think your company is, you know, what you defined in your last comment was basically a startup culture, even though you've got 400 employees and you're 25 years old. What is it about that culture that you think is successful? And I'm going to ask you actually to talk a little bit about the giving people permission to fail, because that's of course endemic to startups, that you're going to try a bunch of stuff and not all of it's going to work. And in most companies traditionally that's a bad thing. But maybe we're having to change what we're doing here. David, would you address that issue of being a 25-year-old startup?
Sure. Yeah, and I guess where the 25-year-old startup comes from is that the business was founded in the 90s. It grew to a pretty sizable amount. It was acquired by Rockwell, but then when we spun out of Rockwell Collins in 2014, we had to really restart everything. So we didn't start in a garage shop with two guys and a dog, which is what a lot of startups have to do, and be very scrappy. We had the benefit of some scale. We had some existing customers and existing technologies, but we really had to redefine the whole business because we were now on our own. There were no deep pockets behind us from a big public company perspective. We had to run on our own cash flow generation. We had to reinvest in some technologies because under the previous owners, they really hadn't invested much for several years. And we had to rebuild direct relationships with the customer. And so, to that point about being okay to fail, we knew that in the first couple of years spinning out, we were going to have to reinvent our product line because it had been allowed to go a little bit fallow. And we knew we were going to have to make some bets on some things that maybe we didn't have perfect market research information on, or didn't have a perfect sense of where the customer would want us to go with the technology. But we met with as many clients as we could, and we talked with them about it. And we actually used that same language that you just used, which is, look, we're not going to bet the company on any one product or any one initiative, but we're going to spread our wings a little, and we're going to try some things. Some of them are going to work, and some of them aren't, and that's perfectly okay. And the other point you made, which I think was important, is that during the prior ownership, part of a big public company, that was not really okay. People were expected to, perform like clockwork and don't stick your head too far out, over the line. Whereas at DataPath 2.0, as we call it now, we really have had to reinvent that and encourage people to bring up new ideas to play. And I've been really pleased with the results of that. It's not just the new folks that we've hired in the last 2 or 3 years. It's not just the millennials who have joined our ranks, but everybody across the board has been very open and willing to bring up new ideas, and it can be kind of anything. One of the mottos that I sort of live by is make it better than you found it, whatever it is. So it could be a new product, it could be a pricing procedure, it could be something simple in terms of the way we order things in supply chain. But what we've encouraged people to do is don't just drive to work and lament all the things that are in your way. Think about how to change them and make them better for your department and your team, because ultimately those will compound and grow. So it's interesting, the language that you used about it's okay to fail. We have used that same exact language, and it's definitely had the desired effect. People are being more creative. They're willing to raise suggestions. The only trade-off to that is, as you encourage it quite a bit, you get a lot of suggestions, and yet you can't take them all on at once, and you have to prioritize. And you got to sometimes go back to people who've got a really great idea, but it's just not the time, or you don't have the funding or the resources to do it right now. And you got to make sure that that person doesn't feel like they weren't heard, or that they were somehow dismissed. You got to let them know it's a great idea, we really like it, we just can't take it on now. Let's revisit that again in 6 months or a year. That's as important as encouraging the new ideas, is making sure that the ones that you don't follow through on don't become a negative to the people who conceive them.
Thank you. And thank you. I want to thank you both. Actually, we're running out of time. I want to squeeze in one question from our audience, which just give you guys 30 seconds to talk to it, which is, in terms of managing the expectations for younger workforce in particular, how do you deal with that whole issue of, well, the Peter principle issue, right? You're good, so we're going to keep promoting you until we turn you into a manager, and then you're going to be mediocre. Or how do you keep that technical track, if you will, alive and well for well, for anybody really who wants to just keep advancing on that path? Nathan, you want to speak to that? Because I'm sure you've got a big engineering organization there.
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually have a defined technical career track that doesn't require folks to enter into management in order to continue their career progression. And we define expectations around that, and we'll continue to invest in that program and grow that program. I think there's reasons why it can be helpful to have technical depth in a manager, but there's by no means an expectation that to progress technically or to contribute technically in a continued growing capacity, you need to become a manager. And so we've really tried to emphasize that and make that part of not only how we incentivize people and grow our company, but also how we set expectations with folks about what their career path can be. And I think, you know, the reality is a lot of people will self-select. You know, not everybody wants to become a manager. A lot of folks really do want to continue to focus on growing their technical chops, and we try to make sure we've got that that framework in place.
Yeah, and I think that's become quite common. It's certainly something I've run into in all of my discussions. We have unfortunately run out of time. I certainly have enjoyed and benefited from the chance to speak with David Myers of DataPath and Nathan Kundtz of Kymeta Corporation about this very large and kind of, you know, you could tell from the conversation, soft, if you will, issue in many ways, and yet one of vital importance to the success of our companies. So, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. This is the last of the webinars for this calendar year, which means it's time for us to start planning out things that will begin in January of next year. I hope very much that you will join us for those, that you will join the mission and become either a sponsor or a member of the industry's biggest professional society, like some of the fantastic companies that you see on your screen. So thank you for joining us. Again, that recording will be made available to you. You'll be getting something from us by email, and we encourage you to share it with colleagues you think will find it of interest. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.